In 2005, the police in Phoenix, the capital of Arizona in the USA, faced one of the most stressful situations imaginable, as several serial killers were simultaneously operating in the area, robbing, raping, and murdering innocent women, men, and even helpless pets. The fear and anxiety in the city were palpable. Mark Gudo, a man with a dark past, was a native of Phoenix, born on September 6, 1964, into a lower-class family. Little did the city know that this man would soon become the embodiment of terror. He was the youngest of 14 siblings. The Gudo family had issues with illegal substances. However, not all of them went down a bad path, and many became good and hardworking individuals. Mark's mother passed away when he was just 12 years old, and he moved in with his older sister. He attended high school where he played American football, although not as successfully as his older brother, Michael. In high school, due to financial difficulties, Mark Gudo was forced to start working. As a result, he lost interest in his studies and, due to poor academic performance, had to drop out of school in 1982, shortly before completing the 12th grade. That same year, a young woman went to the police, claiming that throughout 1981, Mark and his brother Michael had repeatedly raped her in her home. However, during the investigation, the police determined that the woman led an antisocial lifestyle and had willingly engaged in intimate relations with the brothers, casting doubt on her testimony. No charges were brought against Mark Gudo, and the woman soon left Phoenix. But this was just the beginning. At the age of 23, Mark Gudo was arrested for breaking and entering. A year later, he was arrested for driving under the influence. And at the age of 25, he was charged with sexual assault and second-degree attempted murder. The identity of the victim was not disclosed, but the press referred to her as Darling. Early in the morning of August 6, 1989, police responded to a call from witnesses reporting that a man was beating a semi-conscious woman with the butt of a rifle in a parking lot. When officers arrived at the scene, they found Darling partially naked from the waist up, with a bleeding head. Witnesses stated they saw a man leaving the area carrying an additional revolver. The woman was hospitalized with a fractured skull, deep lacerations and bruises all over her body. 3 days later, when she was able to give a statement, Darling identified Mark Gudo as her attacker and provided her address. She explained that they were acquaintances and that, while in her apartment, Mark repeatedly beat her, threw her into the bathtub, and tried to drown her. However, she managed to escape, and he chased her to the parking lot. The police arrested Gudo, who claimed he had consensual sexual relations with Darling, when two armed men, one of them carrying an automatic weapon, entered the apartment, beat her, and left. He stated that he was helping her get to her grandmother's house when the men returned and assaulted her again before fleeing. Naturally, no one believed his story. Mark faced decades in prison, but a series of errors and legal leniencies allowed him to negotiate a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated assault in exchange for having the dangerous conduct charges dropped, making him eligible for parole. A year later, as he awaited sentencing, Gudo, inexplicably still free, robbed a supermarket. Using a silver pistol, which would later be linked to other cases, he forced the employees to accompany him to his car. However, the scene was witnessed by many people, who reported the car's make and license plate to the authorities. Officers soon apprehended Mark at his apartment along with the stolen money. One might think that the armed robbery and kidnapping charges would add to his assault charges against Darling, resulting in a harsher sentence. In the case of the woman's rape, the judge sentenced Mark Gudo to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. In the second case, thanks to a plea deal, he was sentenced to only 4 years. After serving 13 years in prison, on March 8, 2004, Mark Gudo appeared before the State Parole Board for a hearing. It was established that he had behaved well in prison and had completed several self-help programs. Additionally, the inmate had married a woman named Wendy Carr, with whom he had lived before being incarcerated. During the hearing, Wendy and a prison activist spoke in Gudo's favor, stating that his poor behavior was caused by alcohol and illegal substances. Ultimately, the board, which had the final say, voted 4-1 in favor of Mark Gudo's parole. Mark and Wendy resumed living together to start a new life away from crime. According to available information, he found work as a laborer at a large construction company. There, he was considered a diligent worker and was well-liked by his colleagues. The couple's life, and that of the community in the area, seemed to be progressing normally. However, a series of crimes began to threaten the peace of Phoenix residents. On August 6, 2005, 3 teenage girls were attacked by an armed man who forced them to go behind a church on a road called Baseline Road, where he assaulted 2 of them. This marked the beginning of a long string of crimes that, in the following months, would keep the city's public on high alert and put law enforcement under intense pressure. A week later, on August 14th, another sexual assault was reported, during which the victim's belongings were stolen. 3 weeks later, in early September, the murder of a young woman named Georgia Thompson, only 19 years old, was reported. Her body was found in an unbuttoned shirt, unbuttoned pants, and with a gunshot wound to the head. Her wallet was never found. Another sexual assault occurred on September 15th, and just 5 days later, 2 young sisters, walking home from the park, became the next victims. One of the girls was pregnant, but that did not stop the man from attacking them, and at gunpoint, forcing them to move to a secluded spot, where he raped the younger girl while pointing the gun at her pregnant sister's stomach. The incidents were recorded within a close radius to Baseline Road, so the unknown criminal became known as the Baseline Rapist. On November 3rd and 7th, numerous crimes were committed. On November 3rd at 8 p.m., a robbery was recorded, and just 9 minutes later, a sexual assault occurred nearby. On the same day, a man described as dark-skinned with dreadlocks and wearing a fisherman's hat entered a store, threatened the clerk with a gun, and stole $720. Less than 10 minutes later, a report came in about a man in a Halloween costume with plastic glasses who had sexually assaulted a girl who was placing items in a donation basket. After the attack, the criminal demanded that the victim drive him around the corner because he had just committed a robbery. 4 days later, the mysterious man robbed 11 people between 2 restaurants on the same street. After the last robbery, the criminal fired a shot into the air and the bullet casing was recovered. But on December 12th, the already dire situation only worsened. That night, Phoenix homicide detectives were called to the scene of a woman's body found behind a warehouse. Upon arrival, investigators discovered the woman's body lying face up in a pool of blood. She had been shot twice in the head from close range. Additionally, she had neither a wallet nor identification, only a shopping bag with a Christmas design. On September 28, 2005, 2 separate crimes were registered, a robbery and a sexual assault with robbery. In the following days, weeks, and months, the crimes continued to merge into a mix of sexual assaults with robberies. A man named Peter Ochoa, who worked at the same warehouse, contacted the police, claiming he may have seen the murderer. According to Peter, he heard a knock on the back door and thought children were playing soccer in the area. He went outside to shoo them away and saw a man in a hooded sweatshirt bent over the motionless body. The man in the hood also saw Peter. He stood up, aimed a silver pistol at the worker, shot, but the gun misfired. Peter immediately ran and locked himself inside the warehouse. At the scene, investigators found 2 .38 caliber bullet casings and a live bullet that had missed Peter Ochoa. The next day, under fingerprint evidence, the authorities determined that the victim was 39-year-old Tina Washington, who worked at a daycare from which she was leaving when she was attacked. Authorities notified Tina's family and asked one of her adult sons if his mother wore any jewelry. The grieving young man replied that she wore a very unusual ring. On it, next to each of the stones, were the names of her 3 children. One of the investigators remembered that a note had been circulated at the police department about a man committing sexual assaults and robberies of women in the Buzzline Row area, and wondered if there was any connection between this and other cases. In early 2006, the Phoenix police created a special task force of experienced detectives to investigate these cases and assigned about 100 street police officers to support the investigations on a regular basis. The police released a composite sketch of a man with dreadlocks in a fisherman's hat, created from the statements of the victims. The sketch was spread across all media. The police held meetings with the public to circulate the image, which was later even placed on billboards offering a $100,000 reward for information, leading to the arrest of this person. The cause of death was a gunshot to the head. On May 1st, in the parking lot of the same restaurants where 11 people had been robbed, a man in a Halloween latex mask kidnapped a woman from her car and sexually assaulted her. The investigators' task was difficult, as there were no witnesses to the incident. And what was worse, another series of random victims appeared, including men, women, and even pets, who were shot from a moving car. Other serial killers were operating simultaneously. At the end of June, 37-year-old Carmen Miranda was kidnapped from a car wash while talking on the phone with her boyfriend, who heard her screams when she was attacked. The attacker overpowered her, got behind the wheel of the car, and drove about 100 meters, parking behind a hair salon, where the woman was later found with a gunshot wound to the forehead. The attack was captured on surveillance footage, but the image was too grainy to identify the attacker. At this point, the criminal was dubbed the baseline killer. At this moment, you're probably wondering, as I am, how with so many sexual assaults, there was no mention of DNA samples to identify the perpetrator. It was later claimed in a court case that the police department had failed to conduct a timely check on available DNA samples. Perhaps in part, this was true. By the beginning of summer, the detectives working the case began to insist on a more urgent processing of the DNA evidence. As it became known, investigators found DNA on the chest of a girl who had been assaulted in front of her pregnant sister. Phoenix lab specialists immediately seized the sample from the left breast, which was contaminated but still managed to be preserved. However, after analyzing it, they concluded that it wasn't enough to identify the suspect. This and other samples were sent to the state of Arizona's forensic lab, which had more resources than the Phoenix lab. A list of 75 potential suspects was also sent there. Meanwhile, a state prison investigator contacted the task force and reported that a woman claimed to have seen the composite sketch of the baseline killer and knew who he was. She recognized him as Mark Gudo. The woman who called turned out to be Darling, the victim of the rape that had first landed him in prison. It was ordered to locate the man and put him under surveillance. On July 21, 2006, a detective and a probation officer visited Mark, and he agreed to provide the requested fingerprint and DNA samples. Ballistics experts were able to analyze the bullets and shell casings found at the crime scenes and with the victims and determine that all of them had been fired from the same weapon, a .38 caliber pistol. Thus, it was confirmed that all these cases were connected and that the responsibility for them lay with the same person. Finally, an expert from the Arizona Forensic Laboratory analyzed the sample taken from the left breast and, using a new procedure, was able to extract and identify male DNA. On September 2, 2006, he informed the Phoenix police that the genetic sample belonged to Mark Gudo. Later, this same profile would match other rape victims. On September 6th, on his 42nd birthday, Gudo was arrested without resistance in front of his home. Initially, he was arrested for the rape of one of the sisters, and over time, the charges were expanded to several other sexual assaults. Most of the attacks occurred within a 4-kilometer radius around Mark's home. Investigators conducted several searches of Gudo's house. Among the first items seized were a pair of white sneakers that caught the police's attention, as many victims had referred to the attacker wearing white or black shoes. Despite the shoes being washed, the forensic examination found the DNA of 2 murdered victims in them. One belonged to the only man killed by Mark, Chow Cho, and the other to Nicole Gibbons, who was murdered in late March 2005. The lead detective on the case was dissatisfied that only the white sneakers were seized, suspecting that there might be more evidence on other shoes, since almost all of Gudo's victims were shot at close range. Based on the evidence obtained from the first pair of shoes, a warrant was issued for a research of Mark's house. Collecting and analyzing all of the shoes would have been a Herculean task, as Gudo had dozens of pairs, but the effort was worth it. Inside a brown leather boot and a sealed sandwich plastic bag, some clothing items were found, including the ring and bracelet of Tina Washington. After Mark Gudo's arrest, his wife, Wendy Carr, became his main defender, claiming that the Phoenix police's conclusions were lies and that officials planted the evidence found in their house to frame her husband and gain fame for solving one of the most shocking criminal cases in Arizona. But the Phoenix police published hundreds of pages detailing all the steps taken during the baseline killer investigation. It was revealed that investigators had at least 10 suspects, but as the investigation progressed, they excluded several individuals. Mark Gudo's name appeared in these documents, although only in rare mentions. The Phoenix police recommended that prosecutors charge Mark Gudo with 74 counts, including 9 first-degree murders, including the murder of Sofia Nunes on April 10, 2006, who, as it turned out, knew her attacker because he had installed a video surveillance system in her house. Additionally, 5 sexual assaults and 3 attempted sexual assaults, 10 kidnapping incidents, 12 cases of armed robbery, 4 attempts of armed robbery, 3 episodes of sexual violence, 9 crimes involving minors, 13 aggravated assaults, and 3 cases of indecent behavior. In March 2017, the prosecution announced it would seek the death penalty for Gudo, asserting that the murdered women had not allowed themselves to be raped. The trial against Mark took place in 2 separate court sessions, one in 2007 and the other in 2011. The defense's almost sole argument was the legality of the search of the defendant's house, implying that the evidence found there had been planted by the police. By the end of the 2 trials, Mark Gudo was found guilty of 76 crimes against 33 victims. For this, he was sentenced to 1,634 years in prison and a death sentence for each of the 9 murders. Mark Gudo is currently on death row in the state of Arizona. Other serial killers operating concurrently with Mark Gudo were Dale Hausner and Samuel Diedemann. They committed the overwhelming majority of their crimes by shooting from a moving car, evidently driven by a sporting interest. However, they were also arsonists and hired killers. From May 2005 to August 2006, they killed 8 people in at least 29 shootouts, presumably under the influence of banned substances. Many people and pets were injured as a result, and several fires were set. This duo was also eventually apprehended by authorities and brought to trial, resulting in Dale Hausner being sentenced to 6 death penalties without the possibility of parole, while Samuel was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Friends, what do you think about this story? Write your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel.